Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. I'm Nancy, and thank you for joining us on the OWASP DevSoft show. On today's show, we were supposed to have Managing Director at Sakarma, Holly Grace William, who's supposed to talk to us about the penetration tester's view of finding security vulnerabilities. However, we have not heard from Holly just yet, so maybe she'll show up a bit later, maybe not. We just hope that she's okay. We hope that she's okay. But I'll introduce you to my co-host in the meantime, and hopefully we can get a discussion going. So here we go. Hey guys. So I have with me, hello Faith.
Hey.
Tanya Janca.
Hello.
And Nicole Becher.
Hi everyone.
Yes. So, like I was saying, we're supposed to have Holly giving us like a penetration testing view of application security testing. And that was a very on-demand topic. And as I said, I hope she's okay, and hope maybe she'll join us a bit later. But for now, how do we want to go about this? Start this off, Nikki or Nicole or Tanya?
Yeah, let's kick this off. I think all four of us probably have plenty to say about how to automate application security testing. So I'm thinking, what do you guys think? Should we just share war stories here, strategies? What do you? Does that sound good? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like before the show started, we're also talking about how the title of the show was How to Automate Application Security. And then I immediately started talking about defenses. And then Nikki immediately started talking about testing and offense. And I was like, maybe we have lots of things to say.
Well, you've both been professionally pen testers, right? Have you, Faith?
No, my background is network security. Yeah.
Security, exactly. I'm in sure I see. So you've both actually done this for a living for a period of time. So I guess I'll let you start what's the difficulty? I guess what was appealing for everybody was the title is hard, and everybody seemed to agree. I saw a bunch of I think there was only one comment saying, no, it's not that hard. It's best practice. So I guess everybody wants to automate application security testing, but what is so hard about it?
Tanya, you want to kick it off? I'm more than happy to hop in, but I don't want to steal anyone's thunder here.
You go first, because I talk a lot. There's no problem with me getting enough time to talk.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for years and years and years, the industry has been sort of preoccupied with, can this be optimized? Can you actually automate offensive security, or automate pen testing, or automate vulnerability analysis? And I think in certain areas you can. Vulnerability analysis is somewhat well automated. Would you guys agree with that? That feels more well automated, from a infrastructure vulnerability management standpoint, whereas code vulnerability is a little bit less automated. Would you think that is true?
Yes. So maybe we could explain for the audience, so if you're scanning Windows Server 2008 R2, then
hopefully you're not, because that thing's end of life. But yeah,
it's like a Christmas tree in a scanner, it just lights up. But but the point is it's going to have only so many configuration settings, etc. And so there's only so many things that the scanner can look for, and it's true or false. Is this configuration set to this or this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're scanning code like a custom application, if you ask Nikki to make a scheduling app, and then you ask me to make one, you ask Faith to make one, you ask Nancy to make one, even if you give us the same set of requirements, it will be completely different. And so then a scanner has to try to figure out what the heck each one of us is thinking. And that's much, much more difficult than, did they set this to true or did they set this to false? And then the scanner's like, well, it's bad if it's this setting.
Yeah, and I think it's true. Finding CVEs is easier to automate. It is easy to find CVEs, not the first time, but to detect the existence of a CVE in your infrastructure, I think is relatively simpler than detecting CWEs. CWEs are hard to find. CVEs are easier to find. I think that's sort of how I think about it. So to Tanya's point, when you have like, what was that?
Will you explain the difference?
Yeah. So CVEs are, numerical names that are given to vulnerabilities that are detected or reported, identified, reported, and then given a CVE based on and ranked by severity, and usually tied to a product, a vendor product, a piece of software, a library, an application, whatever it is. And there are, issues with the code base or issues with the infrastructure that have been detected that are now basically patchable. They usually are released when there's a patch available. I mean, that's a whole murky world that I don't want to get into, but that's generally how it works. Whereas CWEs are more heuristic ways of describing weaknesses in software, right? It's less descriptive in terms of which technology is broken and more around how the application is defective in this one area. I'm going to ask Tanya to help me explain this because I think I might be striking out on that. But
no, I think you're doing a great job. So like a CWE would be like cross-site scripting. And so you can screw up cross-site scripting in so many spectacular ways and like have it in your application. And so it's like a pattern that we're trying to look for, but the CWE describes the vulnerability and the problem. Well, like a CVE will be like, this specific software can be attacked in this exact way, and it's this exact version, and then you have this exact problem. While CWE is more like a common enumerator is like it's weak in this area, but there's so many different ways that we could unfortunately have screwed that up.
Yeah.
Let's take a second to go in the chat.
Like you're looking for.
Here, I just wanted to take a second, go into chat and see a comment. Mark was saying, from a penetrating standpoint, there are several ways, like in the pipeline with pre-configured application setting. It's also great to use that solution with an instrumented app server, I asked. Okay. And he goes on with not having developers involved and having them just focus on a work item list.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is, again, when you start getting into this automated offensive kind of work, you quickly get to a place where Tanya and I were at prior, which is, why don't you just have a secure by default model so you can eliminate entire classes of bugs, right? So like, again, if you have a CSP and that CSP only allows you to run JavaScript from the source, you will not have a cross-site scripting bug in your entire code base because it's just literally impossible for that JavaScript to execute, even if the worst XSS payload is coming your way. And so when you get into like secure by default, you kind of get into a place where, okay, we can really worry about optimizing the automated security problem, or we can spend more time and effort to optimize the secure by default problem so that we never have to optimize the automated offensive security problem. And again, there's not like a right answer here. I really don't think there is. I think there's a balance, and there's what organizations are willing to commit to prioritize, right? There's no clear answer.
Sounds like a discussion that we've had with Clint Gibler at the SEMGREP show, right?
Yeah.
Where he's a static analysis tool, but really focused on implementing secure default instead of and eliminating a class of bugs instead of finding everything and not really being able to address.
But there's challenges there, right? If you're in an organization, I really, sometimes think security is so local. It really depends on the organization you're working with or for. If you're with an organization that's a big, large conglomerate, that's growth by acquisition, tons of divergent technologies all over the place, you might have like every single programming language under the sun operationally in production right now, running a variety of different infrastructure versions, all over the place in different clouds. It's a little difficult to get to a secure by default model when that's the reality that you're faced with, right? So maybe at that point, a better way of spending your security dollars is automating more offensive security. So you can actually detect how bad, problems in this large garden that you are currently growing, right? Or you might want to move to consolidate some of that so that the garden gets a little smaller so you can actually devote resources more selectively. But I really think that, depending on the organization, it can be hard to do secure by default. It's one of those things that I worry that, the industry, like we want to get there, but when you're in a situation like that, there's a journey to get there. And if we get very hand wavy about it, like just go to secure by default, guys, it's so easy. Like that's when we start losing the audience there.
And I feel like it's some solutions like that are easier to implement when you start from scratch. But when you have a bunch of legacy stuff, like it's not as easy to go and to go back and say, and implement those strategies, of course. What else?
Is it possible to
go ahead,
Faye. Sorry, Tanya. Is it possible to completely automate, vulnerability testing?
I think if you have a web app, sorry, Tanya, you take this one. I'm talking too much.
Oh, I was going to say it's completely possible to only use automated things, but are you finding all of the bugs? No. So you can make.
If you have a definite, like let's just say you have an API and that API is a well-defined API definition, like sports get, post, these are the parameters it's looking for. This is, expected format of those parameters, and it's really well-defined. I think you can probably get to a place where you can consistently run tests against that because, every endpoint, you sort of know what the endpoints are expecting. You can throw the delete at it and hopefully, you get this thing does not respond to delete message. I think then you can get to a better place of like automating that because you sort of have this like, complete model of what the application looks like. I think it's when you have incomplete models of what an application looks like and you have automating scanners that try to enumerate other endpoints more and more and more, and they try to figure out what to look at. That's when you're getting to like, you're never going to get to 100%. You're always going to be at some less than 100% place. And you have to kind of like manage that reality, right?
And so here's a good question by Didar. And how does threat modeling help with automation? I think you touched on that a bit, but you complete that?
How does it help with automation? I guess then we could write unit tests against the threat models. So like, let's say you do a threat model and you're like, I think this is going to be a problem. And we're concerned about it. So you could write a unit test. So unit tests are little tiny tests that test the smallest unit of code you can to make sure it does whatever it's supposed to do. So software developers usually write those. However, we can write security unit tests and we can make sure it doesn't do a thing that we're worried about. So that's one option. We could also write tests right into the pipeline. So you can add security tools that do whatever it is that they're good at to your pipeline to automate a test, but you can also just literally write your own script and throw it in there if you desire. I think that Dieter might be talking about the idea of automated threat modeling. I'm not sure because we might have talked about that a bit as part of like the We Hack Purple community stuff recently. One of my clients is doing automated threat modeling because basically I consult there a few hours a week and then he's full time and there's like a zillion devs and us and we're like, we need to get really smart. Let's have a huddle because we're so grossly outnumbered. And we came up with this plan to do a JSON file with every new app and it has 5 questions. So one of the questions is specific for their business, so I won't mention it, but the other 4 are very generic. And it's, so does this app face external or is it internal only? Does it contain sensitive information or not? Is it on our list of mission critical apps? Because they have 4 mission critical apps and the rest of the apps are not mission critical. And then the last one is there any law or legislation or whatever that applies to this? So like, does HIPAA apply to this? Does GDPR apply to this, etc.? And then the numbers are true or false, and then you add those up. So if there's a 0, you don't add it, but if there's a 1, you do. And so it's like, this is a 3. And so then when it goes through the pipeline, each one of the security tests passes or fails with a different threshold. So if your app is a 4, it's going to be very strict. So let's say that you run a secret scanner and it's like, we don't have a lot of confidence, but this is potentially something, it's just going to stop and break the build immediately, as opposed to if it's an internal app and the secret scanner is like, we don't know, this might be a thing, it's probably not, you might let it go. Although I would argue that with secret scanning, you should probably just always never let anything go. Let's talk about SCA instead. So SCA is like, it's a low, you just like let it go. But if it's, I don't know, if it's like a 4 out of 4, you wouldn't let it go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree, Tanya. I mean, I think that I think I'm just like reading the chat here. I think that Didar is saying no, she really means how do you drive automation, not automating threat modeling, but how can you actually help use threat modeling to help in the road to automation?
Yeah.
And I think that what is the goal of threat modeling, right? Like the goal of threat modeling is to identify like what is this app like? What are the likely things that could happen to this app? The likely bad things that could happen to this app? Like what kind of data does it have? Is it on the internet? Like what's the worst thing that could happen to this app? And then you sort of build a control environment to like hopefully not have that happen, right? I mean, isn't that at the highest level like the outcome? So I guess you could probably intuitively then throw in testing as part of that, right? So you say like, all right, if the worst thing that could happen to this app is, let's just say availability is its primary concern, right? It has to be up 100% of the time, right? Or 99.99s, right? Maybe at that point, your testing framework has a lot of load testing in it, right? To make sure that it can comply with the availability requirements identified during that threat model, right? So I think that there are like natural ways that you can build an automated testing framework to promote the things that the threat model gave you and to validate that that is true. That's how I use automation in threat modeling related activities.
And wouldn't that be the first step in like when we were talking about secure defaults, right? Like before you start knowing what your defaults are, wouldn't threat modeling be your first step to know what you're trying to address?
Yeah, you can't automate if you do not know. So I think threat modeling will be the first step and then automation.
Right. But I mean, reality is that like, does every organization threat model every app? No. The answer we all know is no, right? So, and by the time sometimes the threat modeling takes place, it might be a little too late to unwind some of those design decisions without a huge struggle. But that's not to say you're not correct, right? Like that I agree with you.
But Joshua mentions, I found there are layers that may have similar models. Then you can use common model and only enumerate specific for the app. So yeah, you might not threat model every single app, but you might have models that you use regularly in your environment, in your organization that you have threat modeled, and based on those templates or models, you implement your secure defaults and you implement your your unit testing and whatever tests you want to have in your pipeline.
Yeah, I think whenever possible, using a template saves time, first of all, like for the devs and the security people, because you can just test that template. So for instance, if you work somewhere, so like I'm gonna pay a company to redo the website for my company because I made it in a weekend after firing someone, because the project had not progressed in months, and so I just like whipped it together, and it looks that way. But so I'm hiring someone. They have a ton of beautiful website templates to choose from that they've already tested the crap out of. And then they just like change the colors, change the logos, change the information, etc. And so they've already had a lot of testing, although I have informed them I will be doing some testing on the site because I can't have an insecure site for a security company. But like the fact that they already have these templates makes it faster. And so when I was a dev, we had like security templates. So we would have a login screen and like company after company we would make these apps for, we would have the login screen. And so we would have a different penetration tester come like a few times a year and test the template. And then we would all update from the template. Does that make sense? Rather than testing every single app. So if we found one bug in the template, then we could federate that, I guess, to every other app and fix it in all of them. And that saved us money because we did not have enough money to test all of our apps. And so that was like our compromise there. And so I don't know if you would call that automation or just like saving a lot of time.
Can we talk about tools? Someone in the chat, actually Dida in the chat asks, is there any tool that can scan for hard-coded secrets in third-party code?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Nikki.
Which ones?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where, like, if you're just searching through a GitHub repo, I mean, is that where we're searching through? Because if you're just searching through a GitHub repo, you could just regex that and like search through the entirety of the code base and look for ways that you define passwords. Again, if they're going into Secrets Manager or if they're just being stored in config files, you know, you sort of look for keywords or just literally the word password equals. I mean, that's honestly going to get you like 80% of it, right? Or pem.pem or, you know, things like that. So yeah, but if it's in the code base that's in GitHub, it's much easier to search than if it's somewhere else. You know, I'm assuming that that's what you're looking for. But I think some of them, you know, Git secret. There's a lot of different ways to do this.
But when you want to think about the whole life cycle, the whole SD, you know, different tests, depending on where you are in the SDLC.
I would say that basically, if you want to scan for secrets, you should scan your entire code base to see if there's any secrets. And I use something like TruffleHog. So TruffleHog, I'll search for entropy. So is there a whole bunch of letters and stuff everywhere that it looks like it could be a hash or a secret or a password or something? And then I also do a search for password, key, secret, connection string, and there was another one. I can't remember what the fifth one was, but basically those. Oh, license, yeah, and then run it across the entire code base. Correct all of those things. Some will be false positives, and then figure out how to suppress those false positives until you have it running and you're finding nothing, and then add it into your pipeline. Preferably, if you're using like GitHub or GitLab, you can do something called a pre-commit hook. So as the developer is trying to say, okay, so I just like added some new code, so if you could check it in, it'll do that look for, does it say credential? Does it say connection string? Does it say password? Or does it have this big blob of characters that look potentially like a problem? And then if it does, it just stops and doesn't put it in your code in the first place, because then you have to rotate that secret, then you have to issue an incident, then you have to do all of this stuff to respond to this potential problem. But if it never gets checked in, yeah, so in GitHub, there's like Gitty Leaks, which is, in my opinion, the absolute best named one. But there's like a ton of them in Azure DevOps. There's CredScan from Microsoft because it's their tool. Jenkins. So
Yeah.
all of them can use TruffleHog. Like there's like a ton of things to scan, but I suggest scanning your entire code base first, getting rid of all of those, figuring out a configuration file that will block those false positives so that you're not like constantly alerting on crap that's already there, and then just scan the new code for potential secrets.
And also have a secure by default way of telling developers to store secrets in a thing. Is Key Vault the thing? Is Secrets Manager the thing? Is SSM Secrets Manager? Like there's got to be a better way for them to do this. They're doing this because they don't know of another way. So rather than attacking the problem that way, which is a great way to attack the problem, fix the behavior, right? Because that's underlying. That's the thing that's causing the problem. Is they just don't know of another way to commit this. Or
are you saying shift left?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with developers where, you know, that's really the underlying problem. I have nowhere else to put this data. Where am I supposed to put this data? Like, am I supposed to put it on a text file on my desktop, right? Should it be there? Like, if there's no better way to do it, then they're going to continue to do it this way. And there's a ton of different tools that you can use. So I'm not even going to get into those. A lot of it's dependent on the cloud environment you're using, or someone in the chat just talked about HashiCorp's Vault. Of course, all these tools are out there. You know, you have to find the best tool for the organization and then socialize that as the tool that solves this problem. And, you know, we're going to validate, again, it's about preventative versus detective controls. You want to prevent this stuff, but you should also have the detective control to find it should one of the preventative controls kind of fail. Yeah.
I want to move on with Shivani's questions. She's asking, is only OWASP checklist sufficient for AppSec? And I want to expand on that question on saying, what does OWASP have in its toolkit and its guidance to help with automating application security? Who wants to take that one?
To help with automating, so the checklist that she said, I think she's talking about ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard.
I
I'm
hope,
not
and I
sure of
hope
an
it's not OWASP top
checklist.
10. So I would say OWASP top 10 is not the checklist. I hope that's not what you're talking about, because it wouldn't be sufficient. So you're talking, you would start with ASVS, Tanya, you're saying.
I wouldn't.
No?
I feel like ASVS is an awesome tool for a pen tester. I have like a blog where I released a bunch of guidance. So I have like security requirements for web apps. And then, so I start with that. So like, are you doing a file upload? Okay, so here's your guidance for that. Are you doing this? Okay, here's your guidance for that. And just like pile it onto their list of requirements. I'm also like currently working on one for serverless. I have a basic one for APIs. And the idea is that, okay, if this is the technology you're using, these are the requirements I want you to start every project with. And then when they're coding, it's like, so here's your secure coding guideline. I don't have language specific ones yet, but that's a thing I'm working on for next year. And so it's like, I expect you to abide by these guidelines. And then here's secure design concepts. I want to see you try to apply these. And I want to whiteboard it with you to talk about each one to see if we could fit any of them in. So for instance, like assume breach or zero trust, I have like this list, and sometimes it makes sense to put them in and sometimes it doesn't. But, you know, like how can we make sure your app is doing least privilege whenever possible, right? And so whiteboard it with them, and threat modeling just ends up happening during that session. And then from there, then they're coding, and then hopefully they're following your organization's secure coding guideline, and you can provide secure defaults to help them do that. So like Clint has talked about wrappers. So you can make your own, or you can buy products that will do this, where basically if you type out like a string copy, for instance, it's like a really old list, old way of doing things that's not very secure. It'll just, when you tab off the line, it will correct you like a spell checker and put like the right code, or it'll alert you and say, no, you shouldn't use this. This is a bad idea, buddy. And so like that's giving like immediate feedback.
So are you
Tanya,
saying don't use, sorry, Faith, are you saying don't use ASVS just for testing, but, you know, start earlier than that as security requirements?
Yes, yes. And I
Yeah.
would say ASVS is great if you want to be a penetration tester. It's very thorough. It's very intense. But like,
Yeah, it's heavy
do
handed.
I think I could automate all of that? Well, if I had 400 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Is that
$4
the
million.
and $4 million? And also, like, is that the most effective way to secure my app? Starting with that, not in my opinion. If I'm a pen tester, though, like, would I want to cover that? Yeah. I'm gonna look
Yeah.
like a rock star while I obliterate all your stuff.
But Scott mentioned start with level one, though, right? I think ASVS, if you're not familiar with the document, has different level. Level one is for what every app should have, and level two, if you're having sensitive information, and level three even higher. So level one could be a good way to start, at least to know what to address. And I've seen it used not only like for on the compliance side, and like just as a checklist, and you don't have to take it all. And Jim Manico, who's one of the project leaders, mentioned that multiple times, right? You take it, you fork it, and you adapt it to your organization the way you want it. You don't have to use all of it, and if it's not relevant, check it, right? Faith, I think I interrupted you earlier. What were you?
yeah, I actually just wanted to ask Tanya, are you saying that we don't have any industry specific list of recommendations other than the ASVS that we're talking about?
I published recommendations in my book, and on my blog that I think count. But do you mean, so what specifically for recommendations? Like, because like lots of us have published lots of recommendations on lots of things. So you're saying, are there industry recommendations, but like
Yeah,
on what
because
specific?
yes. So the question is about whether or not to use the OWASP checklist, right? And you mentioned
But which
that
checklist?
the
What are they
OWASP.
I think
talking about?
ASVS.
ASVS. Let's
ASVS.
assume
Okay,
that
yeah.
it's ASVS.
ASVS. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Yeah, if I'm going to do security testing, I want to use ASVS. I think it has value. I think it's an amazing document. I think if you hand it to a software developer, they'll be like, what does this mean?
Okay.
This is not my job.
No, I agree with
Yeah.
you, Tanya. You know, you have to be careful. I think, I don't know, we talk about this a lot, but security people make the mistake of I think it's a mistake of assuming that developers care about security and want to be security people, just like we're not developers, right? Like that the roads get closer, but we're not. We all have different things that power us to move forward into in our work lives. And I think you're right. Handing them a document like that makes them feel like you are just giving me a lot more work, and it can be perceived as like a negative thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the biggest way that you can enable a developer, right, is by handing them a document.
So I'll go back to my initial question. Is there anything else in OWASP that you would use instead of ASVS, or even in OWASP, outside of OWASP, any type of reference that you would use, you start with? As I'm just trying to give them a list of references. You spoke about some things on your blog, Tanya. There's things in
yeah,
OWASP. Is there anything else?
Oh, okay. So I understand now. People should read my book. It's called Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. And it is a guide from beginning to end of how to create secure software. I understand the cue now. Sorry, I'm a bit slow. I don't have that much caffeine this morning. So you should buy my book because that is exactly what it does. From OWASP, I would suggest the Proactive Controls project. So it's a list of 10 things to do to help to ensure your software is more secure. Is it a complete list of everything you could ever do? No. But is it a totally kick-ass place to start? Yes. So like, yeah, Magno. Yeah, I agree with you. Also, that's an awesome profile pic with the sunglasses. I need to update my profile.
An addition is read the security documentation of the programming language that you're using.
Yeah.
List from the
Yes.
chat.
Yeah,
Another way
if
that I
there's-
like to look at this. Oh, sorry, Tanya. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to elaborate more on doing that. So you please go.
No, I mean, it's sort of a little bit of a shift, but I think another way that I like to look at this and I like to socialize with other developers there's like these three buckets of code. There's code we buy, right? Like vendor code that we've purchased. There's code we've imported, like libraries, like Node libraries, NuGet, third-party libraries, whatever. Things that an SCA product or dependency checker can help us find CVEs in. And then there's the code we write, right? And all three of those are like, you know, they have the different security model around each one of them. And so when someone's like, is my code secure? You know, it's sort of like, well, what do you mean your code? Like the code we just bought? Because that's a whole different way of analyzing that. The code you imported? Because that's a whole different way of analyzing that. The code you're writing. So I like to get that, like split it up into those three categories in your head so you understand that there's a different tool set and a different way of looking at these three different things as you ship your code. Because you could have an application that has all three of those things that join together to, you know, that you eventually deploy in production. So that's how I think it makes the problem a little bit easier to manage. So developers are oriented around like, okay, this is code we're importing. Therefore, we have to use, you know, NPM audit or white source or dependency checker or another SCA tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it works in the world that I live in, and I'm just sort of helpfully introducing that to how I like to think about the problem.
Yeah, I think that's great. I also think that like when we're trying to find vulnerabilities, that I've seen some companies just work on one way. And like you said, so I feel like you check the third-party components for sure if you can, if you have access to the code. You analyze the code that your team wrote. So that could be like SAST or code review or IASP, but then you also interact with the application when it's running. So you would do dynamic application security testing. And that could be DAST, that could be an IAST tool, that can be like a manual penetration test. That can be just having like the worst user that you know at your entire organization just play with it. Because like I have had users where they're not technically a tester, but they just like break everything ever. And I'm like, give it to that person. And just be like, yeah, we just wanted you to like take a look at it. And before you know it, they've done some ridiculous, stupid thing with it that you know no one should ever do. And you're like, oh crap. Um, but yeah, like we want to do a like interaction with the app. Then we want to verify all the code. So that's the code you did not write and the code you did write, because you accept the risk of all of it. Yeah,
Yep.
Nikki, I love the way that you said it. It's so good. I feel like
and all of those things can be dynamically scanned. All of them, right? You can dynamically scan all of that code. So at the end, you should always do a dynamic scan or some sort of interactive scan. And I think earlier in the chat, somebody was talking about how a lot of the bug bounty hunters use a lot of automated tools to enumerate endpoints, right? And fuzz subdirectories and look for endpoints in the application that are not known by Google or not known by, you'd have to really like brute force this to try to find these endpoints. And so again, I also feel like this is a huge way of this is one of the best ways that you can automate an application. If you have a list of all those endpoints, right? Whether it's an API definition or even a web app, right? You just have a list, like a file. I think where did I read this one time, that the dynamic vulnerability scanners or the dynamic web scanners spend a considerable amount of time just doing spidering. And there's actually a lot of problems with the way these things spider applications, like breadth first or depth first search, and like they miss other endpoints, and like they spend a lot of time looking just for endpoints on a web app. So if you in your development environment, or even a QA team or a test engineering team can help out with this, like literally a list of every single endpoint that the application has. And then you feed that into a dynamic vulnerability scanner. I think that's like, if that is literally all the endpoints that the application has, there's nothing for the bug bounty hunters to brute force and fuzz, because that's it, right? You've tested every single endpoint. There's no additional endpoints. It's not perfect, but I think it does get you measurably a little bit better.
a strategy I've seen with some teams is they will have their QA team make a HAR file, so HAR. So they'll record it with something like Selenium, and they'll have their QA team test every single page, and they record all of it in this HAR file. Then they feed the HAR file into the dynamic application security testing tool. And then it's like, it's on. You just made me a list of every single thing, and like add the functionality, like so they know how, like what type of stuff is supposed to go into each input, etc. And then it reacts to that HAR file. And so it knows, like you were saying, it knows all the endpoints then. It's yeah, and it makes things go so much faster because you skip that discovery enumeration phase completely, because it's like, I already know where I'm going. I have a map. I like it. I like it.
There's a question in chat from Magno.
Yeah.
What does it mean to really practice DevSecOps or automated AppSec? Do I need SaaS? Do I need DAST? Do I need SCA? Which one should I start with?
So my definition of DevSecOps is it's what AppSec people do in a DevOps environment. So it depends on your goal. I would say that I usually start with trying to figure out what the security posture is of the client I'm working with. And so sometimes we have SAST running in every pipeline. That's the only thing we're doing, and no one is reading any of those results. And most of the developers turned it off while we weren't looking. And like, no one's fixing any of the bugs. So I feel like you want to set goals of what you want for your AppSec program, and then you want to choose your tool set based on what your goals are. So if you're like, we have no idea what any of our apps are doing, no one's fixing anything, the developers are, not understanding our tool set, they don't understand what the results mean. Sometimes you need to start with education. Sometimes you need to change to an easier to understand tool, or a tool that has way better documentation. So I feel like maybe his question is there a recognized, yeah, I agree with Scott, understand process before you apply tools, for sure. But maybe what the original question was is like, is there a checklist of things that you have to have in order to say you're doing DevSecOps? And I would say you have to be doing DevOps properly first. So you have to be ensuring that you're getting fast feedback to the right people that's accurate and at the right time. You have to be emphasizing the speed of the entire system, and that includes with your security tests. So sometimes that means doing things out of bound and not in the pipeline so that you're respecting getting the process as fast as possible, and that you have to be doing continuous learning, risk taking, and working hard to improve your daily work. And so as a security professional, that means us doing work to improve the daily security work of dev and ops. And so I know that that answer is really high level and they just want a list of tools. But if it was just so easy that we could give them a list of, like, put every single tool in your pipeline, have your pipeline take 9 hours, that's not like a really good answer. And I know that every security question that the answer is it depends,
It
and I'm
depends.
sorry, that sucks. Nikki or Nancy, do you want to add to my ridiculously vague answer?
I think it depends on what you can accomplish in the organization, which is also a really vague answer. Because again, you could theoretically design like the most elaborate DevSecOps program that you think meets all the DevSecOps things. You try to sell it, and everyone's like, no, like this is never going to work here. So, and then it could be so well designed, but we're not getting anything done, right? It's not being well executed on because it can't be, because the organization just is a little bit different, right? And so I think you really have to think about what is achievable, and it's okay to make slow progress. That's the other thing too. Not everything has to be like, oh, overnight we have a full, infrastructure as code, pre-flight checked, Terraform plan script, CI/CD rolled out. I mean, sometimes that just takes a year or 2 years or 3 years, or it's a journey. And I think that's okay. So I think the best way to do DevSecOps is to do it incrementally and sell it in the organization with what will work and what is actually solving a problem for your developers. If you just sit down and talk to them, they'll tell you all the things that are broken, right? And all the areas where there can be improvements. So sometimes it's less about what we want as security people and more about what's like best for the organization by talking to people in the organization. Again, that's a very vague and non-answer, but I just don't know if there's like a theoretical way you can construct a program that will always work 100% of the time.
But we're in security.
Yeah,
we never really have 100%. We never really have 100% answers, right?
Yeah,
yes.
you're always, it's risk management. That's what we're doing all the time. We're managing risk, and not all the bad things will happen all at once, or they hopefully won't happen all at once, right? So you sort of have to make risk-based decisions here as to what to do next. Yeah.
I would say too that sometimes I see organizations focus on trying to find 100% of vulnerabilities, but there's no thing set up for developers to help them fix the vulnerabilities. There's no time where they're working with developers and explaining secure design or explaining, okay, so the reason why I keep kicking this bug back to you is because you've made a block list in your input validation. And I can always get around that because I'm a jackass. And so what you need is an accepted, approved list, sometimes called a wait list. You need, A through Z and 0 through 9 is allowed, and that's it. And if you don't have if something outside of that is in, you're not allowed in. And so like sitting down and explaining that concept to a dev that's just not getting it, if you don't have time to do that, then that dev will never fix that bug. And the whole reason we want to do any of these security tools, the only reason is because we want our apps to be more secure. And if we are finding hundreds and thousands of bugs and no one's fixing them, or they're rarely getting fixed, or the fixes are crap, we're not getting what we truly want, which is rugged, reliable, high quality, secure software. There's a thing in the chat. You have to get the developers backing before deploying any security scanning tools in the pipeline. Yes, they will be pissed. I'm working with a client right now, and basically we are making a demo pipeline for them. So we have their app, we're deploying it, we're doing all this stuff, and then we're adding some security tools and perfecting them and making them super, super efficient and fast suppressing all the false positives. And then we're going to present it to them and say, is it okay if we put this first tool in your pipeline? Okay, can we put this second tool in your pipeline? With the idea of gaining their input. And once we have one app that's looking really good and its pipeline's really nice, then we're like, hey, the rest of the devs, look at this, look what we did. Can we add some of these for you? And like slowly introduce all of the teams to it. If you run around and like lock a bunch of doors on devs, they're going to be pissed. If you just start breaking the build, because when I started with this client, they're like, well, we have SAST running on every pipeline. And we went and looked, and 3/4 of the devs had turned it off. And no one had ever logged in to the SAST tool. So it was running and no one had fixed a single bug. And I was like, okay, so let's take a step back. What do we want?
Shivani has a slightly different input. She says, for DevSecOps, we should always work with DevOps team first, then developer comes in pictures. What do you think about that difference in comment?
I would say if you're doing DevOps, then the developers should be on the DevOps team, just like the ops people should be on that team, or the people that do both. So I guess I'm confused because in my eyes, a DevOps team includes developers.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think I agree with you. I would also just say too that as security people or DevSecOps people, there's an element of like we look at developers, or we try to give advice to developers like, hey, you should use the CSP, right? Because they're great and CSPs are easy, not
Could
easy,
you say what
CSPs,
CSP is?
Yeah, content security policy.
Policy.
Yep. So instead of using, to manage all the different ways that resources are going to load on a website, you could use a CSP to explicitly define that. And so for years I was like, guys, CSPs, turn it on. And then I tried to turn one on, right? And I was like, wait a second, this is actually hard. It's actually painful and hard. And I kind of felt bad for like all the people that I was like, just turn that on. It's so easy. It's not easy. It's not like adding a header to a HTTP response and just saying, all right, it's done. And so I think there's a little bit of that dog fooding, right? So for everything we're going to sort of say to developers like, hey, do this, you should just try it once so you can understand a little bit more of like the pain or maybe not pain, just a little bit more of how the implementation works, not only for your own awareness and education, but just then it just helps that conversation because you're sort of partnering with them deeply. And that's, I think at the end of the day, how you build trust, how they trust you, you trust them, and like you build a better program in your organization. So
like that you can run the tools, but don't send any feedback if you don't understand it and you don't know what they're supposed to do with it. Like have what Tanya was talking about, or something running in parallel, have some Sharif, who's a chapter leader here in Ottawa, says, your pipeline can also inform you with metrics. And, you don't have to provide them feedbacks, but get information out of what's going on and then eventually provide that feedback. And that can be done without first talking to developers, but inform you to be ready to talk to them and actually provide, valuable input. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have a client actually, and they used to have like a zillion tools in their pipeline, and it took around 1.5 to 3 hours to run the security part of the pipeline. And so one of my friends works there, and then they became my client. And what they did is they actually yanked all of the things out of the pipeline and just put a security API in the pipeline. So the security API is true or false. And so they actually have continuous scanning constantly of all of these tools in pre-prod. And so developers are pushing stuff all day long, and these tools are running all the time, and they have someone validate the ones that need validation, and then it sends the information to the API. And so now it takes apparently under, he said sometimes it's less than a second, but like a couple of seconds, and it's just true or false, like it breaks the build or it doesn't. And he said at first, like the other security people were saying, oh, well, but what if, they just pushed a serious, huge vulnerability? And he's like, they're pushing like 5 to 10 lines of code at a time. There might be a super serious vulnerability. However, before, we were slowing them down to the point where they couldn't push that much code, and we were way behind every single project where we wanted to be. Now we're way faster, and we're catching all of those within 24 hours as a maximum. But mostly within an hour or two, we catch each of those things. And because they push code all day long, we find it. And so basically the devs are all super happy now and love the AppSec team. And management is pleased and they're getting like changes out faster. And so sometimes we have to think outside the box. And I truly believe that if we remember as security people with it, so like I have certain mantras that I have that I try to use when I make every decision. And so for security, my main thing that I always try to include when I'm doing any decision is it is my job as a security professional to enable every single other person in the business to get their job done securely. And so if I'm disabling them from doing their job, if I am hindering them in doing their job, then I'm failing. And so they need to get X done. How can I make sure they get X done in the most secure way possible, but they're still definitely getting X done? And when we think about things like that, I find that we get better results and people like the AppSec team more. So Jimmy B
So
says, you can't stop people from doing their job. As security people, it isn't our job to take people on a journey. It's our job to go on the journey together. Oh, I love it.
yeah, I just want to go back. Not we don't have to go back and forth, but just to Shivani's comment, she, to close that loop, she also says DevOps people have different skills. They are trained how to set vulnerability in server side, like SSL misconfiguration. And Scott also adds, I've worked with DevOps team that didn't work with devs. DevOps did scans, but devs never got reports. Make sure you have both. Training is a great program to start and get both teams. So, different teams work differently, and we need to keep that in mind.
And I will say, if you have a river that wide in your organization, you might want to think about how to build a bridge over that river, because those jobs are colliding fast, I think, right? I mean, DevOps, they have to, how do you deploy infrastructure? You're writing like a Terraform plan or a CloudFormation script, or like, isn't that what most people are doing? I think a lot of people are doing that. That's code, right? And so, and then, or the developers are writing that code. Again, those jobs are kind of collapsing in on each other. So I think it's a great opportunity to like share that knowledge across those teams. Again, that sounds hand-wavy, but I think it's a good thing to do, because I think people get defensive when they think that like, oh, well, now the developers are writing SSL like configurations. What's that about? That's my job, right? And so you might want to just kind of get ahead of that.
Have someone who's managed a program like this, Nicole, have you found difficulties in defining roles and responsibilities? Sometimes I hear about new technologies and new ways of doing things like OPA and, testing infrastructure as code. Like, is it clear in your organization when those things come? Who does that? And
it's not clear. And that's your job as security people to clear that up, right? And so it's about trying to figure out, like, as that, again, like a tool like OPA, Open Policy Agent, it's a configuration management tool for Kubernetes and other things, but I've used it extensively in the Kubernetes world. And it's to basically prevent bad things from getting on the Kubernetes cluster, right? Or misconfigure things, right? And whose job is that? It's a configuration issue. So I've asked people, whose job is that? I'm like willing to take all sorts of feedback on whose job that should be, because I don't know. Like, I think whoever wants that job, that is it a developer job or is it an ops job? I'm not sure. And I think that there's always unclearness, there's always vagueness around that. And it's about defining why we're doing this, why do we need this, and then who's going to take accountability and responsibility for it, right? At the end of the day, it's protecting the health of the Kubernetes cluster, right? So it's sort of more in the operational side, right? But the developers are the ones making those configuration files. So you sort of just have to figure out a new way to kind of divide up that accountability. Yeah.
We don't have a long history on how that's done, so I guess now
I don't know. You call your friends, and you say, "Hey, Tanya, whose job do you think this should be?" And Tanya's like, "Well, I don't know," So
Yeah. And could it be that depending on where you are and who you have, depending on your people and how it works, like it's a different answer for everybody? And that I feel that's what I've been hearing since the beginning of the conversation, right? There are some best practices, but also, things change depending on who's in your organization and what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. So there's no like, here's the answer. Yeah, you have to think about it. And yeah.
I love Scott's comment. Best automated
No.
application scanning is a good AppSec hire.
That can build a program.
Yeah.
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 Because then the tooling comes second. You need somebody who really understands all of why those tools exist, what job they serve. Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Yeah.
Are you going to say something,
It's
Tanya?
funny. We thought that we might not have enough to say and that we wouldn't know what to talk about during this hour. And I bet we could talk 4 more hours because
Yes.
we have 4 people on the video and then way, way more people in the chat who will really care very passionately about this topic. So maybe next year we're going to have to do another thing on it. Maybe we're going to have to talk about like automated everything or what secure defaults are.
And I sincerely hope that Holly is okay. We haven't heard back, but yes, I'm not Holly.
Yeah, let's just hope it's a technical problem, like her internet went down and she's probably unfortunately ridiculously stressed about it. But let's just hope it's a technological issue and not like an actual human issue.
Exactly, that everything's okay. So we'll reach back and hopefully bring her back for next season. Right? We're taking a break. We have one last show next week. No, actually, it's the end of Friday. On Friday. On Threats Manager Studio with Simone Curzi from Italy is coming to talk to us. We'll talk a little bit about the threat modeling manifesto. He isn't one of the author, but we'll touch about it. What is threat modeling? What is the tooling around that? And we have a few, I think, up to 3 guest co-hosts that are into threat modeling. I always find fun to have people around the table that are passionate about the topic that can add their own flavor. So I think that's going to be a pretty cool discussion. So as we wrap things up, let's go with a roundtable, maybe closing up the topic or saying what they're up to and what we should be looking out for. I'll go with Tanya first while everybody thinks about it, because Tanya, I know you have a lot to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I invite people to check out my book, shamelessly. Yes. Yeah, all I do is teach AppSec all day long. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about these things. I would like everyone who is watching this to consider checking out their local OWASP chapters. So obviously with COVID, we're not spending quality physical time with people, but a lot of the OWASP chapters are holding online events. And also if you are a woman or basically not a dude, you could check out WOSEC, Women of Security. If you want an invite to meet lots of other women, we have like this online community we're just launching. And We Hack Purple is launching an online community too. So there's lots of places where you can connect with people, basically try to meet other people that are into the same things as you. And the DevSlop show, I guess I feel like generally wants to encourage everyone to participate more and learn more about the things that really fuel your interest. And so definitely, obviously, subscribe to our show, click the thumbs up button, follow all of us on the social medias if appropriate, but try to reach out and actually connect with people because 2020 has been very bizarre and we don't want any of you to be lonely and we also don't want any of you to stop learning. And there's just like so many places that now you can connect with people online, like people just like you. And so that's kind of what I would like to have.
Thank you, Tanya. That was very nice. Nicole, what's 2021 looking like for you, and anything you want us to take a look at?
Just a lot of the same old as 20. Well, hopefully a lot different than 2020.
Please.
But yeah. Maybe we'll all see each other in real life again next year, like we did in January. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say. Oh, I'll let you finish. I'm interrupting you. But I know
I'm very hopeful for next year. So I
Yes.
am looking forward to all the things.
I know. I just wanted to mention how much content you've been creating, and that we're getting ready to share with everybody next year. Training on Cloud Goat, on cloud security, training on Kubernetes. So yeah, I think the show's continuing, but I think we have other interesting content to give people a chance to actually practice and have hands-on experience on those technologies. And I'm personally super excited about that. And and it's coming up next year. So follow us. I see Shivani and other people have been asking for links, but everything's in the show notes. I think I've already did that for most of the co-hosts, and I'll add anything that we've missed. But anything to follow DevSlop on all the platforms is there. So yes, sorry I interrupted you, Nikki, on that.
No. Somebody, I think if we're gonna, we'll go through. Faith, you go, and then somebody asked a really cool question that I think we should end with.
Okay, awesome.
But I don't want to cut Faith off.
Is Faith still with us? She seems very static.
I'm supposed to be here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, but you're not moving. But go ahead. I think it's a pretty good, static picture of you.
It is good.
It's good. It could have been worse. So go ahead.
Okay, so 2021, I hope, will be a year of a lot of hands-on trainings from DevSlop, and that we will put Corona behind us eventually.
Yeah, that's a big wish, big hope. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Okay. So Nikki, what did you want to
somebody, Magno is, what are your predictions for AppSec in 2021? It's a good question.
Oh.
All right, I'm going to go first. I'm going to make a very dramatic prediction. That there's going to be some wild Kubernetes issues in 2021.
Oh.
That's what I think. Not like in a bad, I mean, maybe in a bad way, but there was a CVE, I think, that Apple found last week about how, in a multi-tenant Kubernetes environment, if somebody just takes an external IP of something in the cluster, they could actually man in the middle all the traffic. And this was reported, I think last year, and just got a CVE. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to unwind inside Kubernetes. I spent a lot of time in there, and I'm always pretty whoa, it's pretty intense in here. So, I don't know. Maybe there could be some wild Kubernetes drama next year.
Magno agrees with the drama. What I'll go with, it's not a prediction, but what I've been excited about, I find that infrastructure as code is exciting to me, not only because of what it can do, but everything that we've been doing in AppSec, we can now apply to infrastructure as code. And for some reason, I find that so cool. And, and even if you're on Marco, oh my God, I forget his name, but he has
the
cloud security newsletter. He actually came out with an article on, he watched Clint Glover's SemGrep presentation on, applying secure defaults and finding vulnerabilities and eliminating classic vulnerabilities, and use that on Terraform on on infrastructure as code, right? And he kind of experimented and compared it to OPA. So, I find that super exciting. So it's not a prediction, but something I'll definitely be on the lookout for, and hopefully bring some content like that to the show. And Joshua agrees with me.
In the chat. Putting his thing in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Do you have a prediction, Tanya?
I think that my prediction is that some companies are going to start taking AppSec a lot more seriously, and that there's going to continue, unfortunately, to be a lot more breaches and a lot more bad stuff in the news. And that basically that some companies will heed that warning and buckle down, let's say, and that others will continue on the same path, unfortunately, and probably have problems. I'm hoping that as more companies move to DevOps, that if they're doing a better job of doing IT, that they'll do a better job of security as well. But unfortunately, I think that some companies might not learn until something very bad happens. The importance of making sure that they're product, delightful in the way that the customers get to use them, but also delightful in the way that they are secure. And it's just not a thing a customer even needs twice about because they can just trust the quality. It makes me sad that customers now can't trust it. Like whenever I sign up for anything online right now, I don't know about you, but they're like, hey, do you want to fill this out electronically? I'm like, no, I don't trust you with this data. And I dream of a day where we can trust them again. Faith, you're back. Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't
and
know what's
you-
happening with my internet.
And you're moving.
Do you
Yeah,
have a prediction?
not a robot.
AppSec?
Yes.
Do I have a prediction in AppSec? No, not really. I just think that the most prevalent threats that we'll be seeing in 2021 will still be ransomware. How does that affect AppSec? Well, it will affect it, but I don't think it's a one-to-one mapping.
Sometimes that's the vector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, co-host. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Faith, for staying on and not. I was ready to cancel the show. I'm like, where's
About to
Holly?
run.
And thanks to the audience for all the great questions. It was
Yes,
great.
absolutely.
Yes.
Keep us going. That's fantastic. So yes, see you all Friday for the hopefully Friday for the last show of the year with Simone Kersey. I'll change the map so you can see at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And that's it.
Thank you, Nancy, for being our fearless leader.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have